EMP Series Revolution, Episode 15. Roger rode slowly up the trail that led to the rear of the church property. The closer he got, the more anxious he became. He knew nothing about what was going on with Carl Fairley, and although Billy Bennett and his crew were long gone, Roger had no idea that the club wasn't still actively searching for him. In fact, Bennett had reported Roger's disappearance to the club, and the order came down to abandon the search for now. With the death of Buddy Tanner, Hammer, and Little Bear, as well as the disappearance of Lee and Roger, the MC had all it could do to keep regular business going. They struggled to regroup and elect new leadership. Taking on the odyssey of a long-distance search for Roger was just not something they were prepared to do at this time. Of course, Roger hoped this would be the case, but had no way to know for sure. When he reached the rear of the church property, he decided to take up a concealed position there and watch activity on the grounds before making contact. While he wasn't afraid of anyone or anything, he was smart enough to realize that he didn't make it this far in life without being cautious. 4 riders rode into town from the north along Main Street. They all wore masks, and they were heavily armed. The leader led his horse up the 4 steps that led onto the platform, which was busy with midday traffic. He announced, "Citizens, Carl Fairley has sent us to issue this plea. We are in a fight for our lives and need every able-bodied man and woman to stand against the military, which unlawfully rules here." People who stopped to listen began to murmur among themselves. The man on the horse continued, "It is important to have everyone's cooperation in this struggle. Be clear that if you do not help us, if you do not stand with us, then you are against us in this fight. The time has come to make a decisive choice. You're either with us or you're with the military. There can be no in-between anymore. There can be nobody who is not committed to one side or the other." Then Jacob Smith, who was on duty observing in town, interrupted the masked man. He rose to his feet and shouted for all to hear, "People, friends, many of you know Carl Fairley personally or have had some dealing with him before and during this struggle. He has made it clear many times that everyone would choose to participate as they felt led to, or not at all if that was their decision. Carl was my neighbor until Major Stillman and his thugs burned down his barn and threatened his family, running him off. He's a good man and would not force or manipulate anyone to join this fight if they did not feel led to do so. I don't know who these men are or where they came from, but I maintain that they are not part of Carl Fairley's group." Then he looked at the leader and then at the rest of his team and said, "If you are with Carl, show your faces. Let your identities be known." He looked around. "There are no soldiers here. Show yourselves." Then the leader spoke. "We cannot reveal our identities. Anyone here could be working with Captain Crawford. Our families and loved ones are at risk." Then he scanned the crowd that was quickly forming. "Heed our warning. Every citizen must decide if they are with or against us. I say again, there can be no middle ground." With that, Jacob Smith challenged him further. He looked over the crowd himself. "People, friends, you know me and I know you. Everyone in this community knows who everyone else is. Most of us have lived here our whole lives." Then he stared back at the leader, sitting upon his horse above the crowd on the platform. "You say you are part of Carl's group? You claim he sent you here to issue this ultimatum? Okay, if you do not want to reveal your identities, I get it. I understand the security aspect of secrecy. He paused for a long moment and then said, There are 4 of you here. I challenge one of you to look over this crowd and find someone you know or are even vaguely familiar with. Call out this person's name. Tell us who they are, where they work or live. Tell us anything about anyone assembled here that will prove that you are part of this community. You can do that and still maintain your anonymity. Then there was a long silence. The crowd murmured louder until it became a low roar. Then Jacobs shouted, If any of you are with Carl, tell us something, anything that can prove it. Then he addressed the crowd. I maintain that these men are frauds. They are not part of Carl's team as they claim. Then the leader leveled his rifle and fired 3 shots at Jacob. He fell dead on the platform, blood pooling around him. The crowd was silent. The leader looked them over again. He said nothing. 2 soldiers who were nearby and heard the shots came running around the corner. One of the other riders aimed his AR-15 and shot both men, killing them. The leader sat silently on his horse. He raised a closed fist, and the other 3 men began lighting and throwing Molotov cocktails into the crowd and the nearby buildings. People scrambled to avoid being sprayed with burning fuel. The front window of the diner was broken, and a Molotov cocktail landed inside, quickly engulfing it in flames. Levi Connolly, who was on duty with Jacob and stationed at the far end of the street, had seen everything and made his way over. He drew his .357 Magnum revolver and squeezed off several shots, emptying the cylinder. He hit and killed one rider and wounded another. By this time, several more soldiers approached, and the siren in the camp was sounding loudly. The leader of the riders raised his hand and made a circling motion. The 2 remaining riders followed him up the street and into the mountains. When Lieutenant Saunders arrived at the scene, he instructed his men to secure the area. A medic examined the rider that Levi shot and confirmed that he was, in fact, dead. Lieutenant Saunders pulled his mask off to reveal the stranger's face. Jacob Smith had been correct. This man was not part of the community. In fact, nobody there knew who he was. It was obvious to everyone, including Lieutenant Saunders, that these men were not affiliated with Carl and his group. Just then, Captain Crawford came out onto the platform. He looked down at the dead man laying in the street before him. He looked over at the crowd and loudly announced, It looks like Carl Fairley is struck again. Thanks to the quick action of one of our citizens, this attack was put down. This threat neutralized for now. Unfortunately, at the cost of his own life. It is clear now, or at least it should be, to all that Mr. Fairley is out of control. Well, as a result, one more innocent man is dead. He looked over at Lieutenant Saunders. Clean this mess up. And take as many men as you need and find Carl Fairley. Stop this madman. Lieutenant Saunders nodded. Yes, sir, he said, as Crawford walked away. Levi Connolly approached Saunders and looked him in the eyes. You know Carl and his men are not responsible for any of this, don't you? It was more a statement than a question. Saunders looked at Levi, but did not answer him. Then Levi took a risk. He said, Lieutenant, I know Carl personally. I have all his life. His dad and I were very close. I know, as I suspect you do, that he is not responsible for this attack, or for the explosion that killed those people the other day. I think something bigger is going on here, And I think maybe you suspect the same thing. Saunders looked intensely at Levi. Lieutenant, I'm sharing my thoughts and concern with you because you seem like an honorable man, a reasonable man. Let's assume for a moment that there is some truth to my suspicions. Where does that put you? Lieutenant Saunders didn't say anything for a moment. Then he responded, It puts me where I am, Mr. Connolly. What you are saying is just speculation. Yes, I can have my opinions and suspicions also, but without any proof, without anything tangible, what am I supposed to do with them? And are you telling me, Mr. Connolly, that you are in regular contact with a wanted fugitive? Levi responded, Lieutenant, I am only telling you this. You are an intelligent man, and I believe you to be an honorable man as well. You think about what is going on here. A point in time is rapidly approaching when you will have to make a decision, to follow your gut, your instinct to do what you believe is right, or to toe the party line. Just think about that, Lieutenant. With that, the two men held a stare for a long moment. Levi said, Have a good day, Lieutenant, and he turned and walked away. Lieutenant Saunders was feeling conflicted. He knew that Major Stillman was corrupt and didn't shed any tears when he got killed. He never really believed that Carl was responsible for his death. Now here was Captain Crawford, so anxious to pin all these recent attacks on Carl and his group as well. Then there was his encounter with Carl to train the other night. The fact that Carl knew about his being recruited into the corruption probe of Major Stillman. Could Carl Fairley really be part of the group that was investigating Stillman? If it was true, that would explain a few things. Still, though, he was an officer in the Army. He had sworn an oath to obey his commanders. He had also sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, they didn't get any more domestic than the captain in charge of the post where he was assigned. Now he was being personally tasked with bringing Carl Fairley to justice. He was struggling to process all that was going through his mind. Roger sat in the tree line watching the activity at church. A large German shepherd came trotting over toward him. Roger reached out his hand and placed it on the dog's neck, petting the loose fur around it vigorously. Hey, dog, that's a good boy. Where you been, boy? You hungry? The dog pushed his head into Roger's belly and kicked it to one side, then the other. Then he lay down at Roger's side and placed his head in his lap. Roger pulled out a bag with fresh deer jerky from a coat pocket and took out a large piece. He gave it to the dog and said, There you go, dog. Enjoy it. That's a good boy. When the dog finished his snack, he got up and went over to lay down by Roger's rucksack. Roger got up and pulled out his night vision optics. He studied the church pavilion and basement entrance. He knew that was their base of operations. He saw one guard in the tower. It looked like Steve. He saw two men walking the church and pavilion perimeter lines. He didn't see Greg anywhere. He had hoped he would be there. There was a chance he was inside, but traffic and activity was minimal. Well, dog, he said, I guess we can't stay out here forever. I came here for a reason, although for the life of me I don't really know what it is. Roger felt the Holy Spirit leading him back there. He had to follow that lead, no matter what. He knew that. He didn't want to sneak in and take them by surprise. He didn't see anyone or anything that he deemed to be a threat. He knew if he could get to Greg or Pastor Sharps, that they would welcome him. On the other hand, he couldn't just stroll in unannounced. He decided that this was a good time as any to make his presence known. He lit his flashlight and clipped it to his cap brim. He stepped out of the tree line into the moonlight, his rifle strapped across his back, out of sight, in immediate reach. He yelled softly, "Attention on the perimeter! Attention on the perimeter!" Steve, in the tower, pointed his rifle at the light and sighted through his night vision optics. "Stop!" he commanded. Roger complied, his hands already interlaced on top of his head. He dropped to his knees and responded, "I have no aggressive intentions. I wish to speak with Greg or Pastor Sharps." Dalton and Richie heard Steve yell from the tower and came from the pavilion basement. They approached Roger, who was on his knees, with his hands still on his head. Richie recognized him. "Hey, I know who you are. You got saved here a few months back. You're that man who saved Jillian and the kids from those bikers in town." Roger looked at Richie and said, "Roger's the name. Greg or Pastor Sharps can vouch for me." Richie said, "You left with Callie to bring her home to her family in the Ozarks. Is she okay? The kids?" "They're all okay," Roger told him. "Home, safe and sound." Richie looked up at Steve, who was pointing his rifle at Roger. "Stand down in the tower," he yelled. "Threat level neutral." Steve shut off his green laser that was trained on Roger's chest. "Threat level neutral," he shouted back. Roger stood up, and the three men went into the basement. Greg was not there, they told Roger. Richie sent Dalton to summon Pastor. "What brings you back here?" he asked Roger. "I didn't think we would ever see you again." Roger chuckled. "That was my thought as well, son. I can't explain it, but I just had to come back." Richie poured him a cup of coffee and asked, "You hungry?" Roger took the cup and said, "I could eat." Richie picked up a bowl from the shelf and scooped some kind of stew into it from atop the wood stove and slid it to Roger. Roger closed his eyes and thanked God for getting him there safely and for the food before him. He proceeded to devour it. Richie heard a whimper from outside of the door and went to check it out. There he saw the German Shepherd that was with Roger earlier. He looked at Roger. "Is this your dog?" he asked. Roger replied, "Nope, but he's been following me for a few weeks. Just came up out of nowhere on the trail one day, been with me ever since. He's most likely hungry. All he had to eat today was a couple pieces of deer jerky." Richie opened up a barrel full of dry dog food. He scooped out a large cup and poured it into a bowl and placed it on the floor. The dog looked at Roger. Roger said, "It's okay, dog. Go get it." The dog set to devouring the bowl of food. Richie looked at Roger and asked, "Have you been feeding him?" Roger shook his head and said, "Some." Richie chuckled. "I got news for you, friend. That dog's been following you for a few weeks, and you're feeding him? He is your dog." Roger looked at the dog and then at Richie. "I guess so, but I ain't laying no claims to him. He's free to take off any time he gets a mind to." Richie looked at the dog and just smiled. "Yeah, I don't think he's going anywhere as long as you keep feeding him." "I suppose you're right, friend," responded Roger. "Good boy," Roger said to the dog, who proceeded to smash his tail against the floor twice when he heard his voice. Pastor came in and Roger stood to offer his hand. Pastor reached out with both hands and wrapped them around Roger. Pastor remembered how Roger had saved the lives of his daughter and his grandkids. As far as he was concerned, Roger was family. Pastor said, "Dalton tells me that Callie and the kids made it home okay." "Yeah," said Roger. "It was a long trip, not without difficulties, but they made it safely. I found out a few things along the way that I think you all should know about." He looked around. "Where's Greg? He's still in charge of security here?" "Well," Pastor responded, "I suppose a few things happen around here that I should make you aware of too." Just then they heard a huge explosion off in the distance. They ran out and up onto the pavilion. In the distance to the west, they saw a huge fireball rise into the night sky, followed by another large explosion.